Greetings again. This is Philip Amerson with the Belonging Exchange podcast, To Be and to Do. It's about the importance of interdependence and not just independence. It's about the importance of relationship building with others and how belonging to others is essential to our health and well being as a community and as a society. And I introduced her earlier in an earlier podcast, my friend Shauna Murphy, and I'm glad to have my teacher, even though she was in high school or maybe junior high when we first met. She was a teacher, and I learned a lot. In our earlier conversation, we talked about education and healthcare, but there are other places where we miss seeing the abundance that's around. And I was thinking, well, I couldn't help but think of Maury Evans, who was
Mm.
in the neighborhood, and this remarkable woman who wrote some of the most important poetry produced by Black women in her generation, and others. Who was the woman that had this after school program where she would teach children after they got off the bus? Do you remember who I'm
Yeah, I
talking?
can't. I don't remember.
Yeah, I remember though. Well, Mike, our friend Mike Mather, said that he asked her what she taught, and she said, "Well, I teach everything from phonics to Sophocles." And I just thought that is so perfect in terms of
Yeah.
in terms of the abundance that was there already in terms of intellect and in terms of education. Um,
And
are
Phil,
there
can I
places?
just interject? The one
Yeah.
thing that when we talk about abundance and what was in the community, there was love. And it was not a romantic love.
Oh,
I mean, there was love in a way that when someone lost a relative, well before the tragic crack epidemic, if someone knew somebody else passed away, even though we were all on the struggle bus in terms of finances, those government cans of beans that just said green beans got thrown into a pan along with some fat back and sent down the street to that family. That's how we loved each other. I bring that up because Mari Evans taught me so much about love and what it means to love the community. And we had the earlier conversation around the white hat. She had no interest in the white hat. Love requires something greater than the accolades and appreciation. It means that sacrifice in ways that we don't even imagine until we're called into the moment. But I can't talk about it was not romantic. When I say love, I was thinking about Fat Mike the other day, Fat Rat, and how he knew how to splice
yeah,
cable. And we
yeah,
had people who would, I mean, real risk to come and turn your water back on. So the
yeah.
poverty was real, but the love was more deep and overcame the poverty in very real ways. And I needed to mark that.
Wow, well, you've gone to preaching. I mean, that that's my job.
Oh, well, have at it, sir.
No, you uh, isn't that interesting that the core of the Christian gospel is often something that's just omitted, and the core is not to not to bring love, but to recognize the love that's already there.
Hmm.
I used to, I spent a little time in Latin America, and I used to get tickled at all these people on the airplane that thought they were bringing Jesus to Latin America. And I used to think, are they going to be surprised when they find out he's been here a lot longer
Hmm.
than they know?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I just think about Miss Stewart who, lived across the
Oh,
street from us, um, and she was meaner than a daggone snake. But, with mom and Jan Hirschman, when they started taking blood pressures, that again, it was about love because they took her blood pressure, it was off the charts. And, my mom and Miss Stewart and my dad would go back and forth. We didn't have a lot of money, but my mom took her to the hospital that day. And what I want to underscore is that in our family, gas money was a thing. It's like, what do we have to let go of in order to take care of her? But taking care of our neighbors, even those that we don't like, that's what love is.
And as much as I wanted to be a pastor that saw that love, I often missed it or I misinterpreted. I'll give you a good example of where I really goofed. I goofed a lot of times, but one was when crazy Alberta Dink
Oh, yeah.
came to, came to me and said, "I'm going to teach violin to these kids in this neighborhood," and my bigotry said, "There's nobody interested in violin in this black neighborhood." Boy, was I wrong.
Man,
Now,
were you wrong?
he,
Yeah, you were real
the
wrong.
Alberta was like a drill sergeant. She
Mhm,
would go knock on those doors and you're going to practice and I'll get you an instrument, but I'm taking it away if you don't. And I don't know if you remember, if you were there, but at her funeral, oh, I just sat back in the sanctuary and wept because there were
mhm.
what, 50 or 60 young people up on the chancel, all of them playing a violin that
Yeah.
Dink, Dink had taught her.
Mhm. Yeah. Trust me, I know goody goody stop stop because both of my sisters.
But it was the same, I was a little better with when the gay men's chorus, Indianapolis men's chorus, said, "Can we use your church?" I was a little better then to say, "Of course you can."
Mhm.
But I had enough sense by then to say, "But it's going to cost you something.
Yeah.
You're going to need to sing for us once every quarter."
Mhm.
And as I look back on it, I think that's one of the ways that congregation became more welcoming to queer folks
Mhm.
was just the fact that there were real live men. And one of the funny things that happened was one Sunday when 7 young men joined the church, one of the dear little blue haired women came along and said, "Oh, all these men won't be long for there are a lot of women joining too." And I got tickled. I got tickled because I thought, she's right. She just doesn't know why she's right. Uh, it was, it was being able, as you've said earlier, it's having the eyes to see a different reality. And the reality is rooted in what you just said, in love.
Yeah. Yeah, and a very clear understanding of love. If there's not some discomfort, then it's not love because it
Wow.
requires a degree of risk to make yourself available and vulnerable and a willingness to let go of something that you've carried
Yeah.
because you have to make space for it.
Yeah.
And I again, I have to credit Sister Mari for I felt like I was a little too young to be schooled so deeply in love. I'm like, I know what love is, but I mean, when you asked me earlier around resilience, it's the understanding of what love requires of us that has allowed me to maintain the resilience to do the work. But
So, what does love require?
the hardest thing that love requires is self reflection.
Self reflection.
What are you will in asking yourself real questions? What are you willing to let go of to make space for something new? What are you willing to say no to? And then who is going to support you through that process? Those questions are answered before you even get to the matter of love because what does love look like for you? And how do you live out that vision in real ways? And again, if there's no discomfort in that vision, then it's not love. If there's nothing that takes you into a direction that you have stayed away from, then how can it be love? You're helping, you're supporting, and all those things are are good in some measure, but people who want to make real connection and real change, you've got to love it. And on days where I'm not loving it, that's where my knucklehead son helps me. I mean, I would love to say that it's a constant and every day I wake up, oh, I just so love. No, because there's pain.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
pain, but there's
So
also
love
healing
love always comes with pain or
th-
risk.
or risk. Risk.
Yeah.
Definitely risk.
Wow. You know, I think about I think about all the lessons that I learned on the playground across the street from the church.
Mhm.
I still remember they had a summer program where the boys played basketball and the girls were cheerleaders, and that was about
Which
it.
left me completely out the game altogether.
Well, you would have been a good basketball player. You were.
Yeah. 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 But,
That changed, but it took some really painful, risky, um,
yeah.
loving changes.
Yeah. Yeah. And the hard part is that it's not always recognized as love.
Yeah.
It's not always recognized as a vision for a different reality, a more wholesome reality for the people involved. Um, when we had the summer program, we wouldn't pay the teen counselors until the end of the summer.
Gee.
And before paying them, we would take them and give them the option to open a squirrels account. And at the time we thought we're teaching them all these things. But in retrospect, that was an exercise in power, not an exercise in love.
Absolutely.
And being
Absolutely.
able to make that when we're lucky, we catch ourselves sooner than later in that space and self-correct. When we're not lucky, we get a note from one of our former participants that thanks you for making them open the account and goes through how it helped them escape a bad situation. And while that felt good, the fact is that this young lady could have escaped sooner had we not been caught up in that power,
That's right.
you
That's
know.
right. And
I'm guilty too. I use the term delayed gratification. You can find it somewhere when I was running the scholars program. And when I look back at that newspaper article now, I just gag because it's like, who are we to impose that requirement on those who don't have the material means to make their day to day? Whereas I don't have to delay my gratification except for Kerry Washington. That's never going to happen for me. But the imposition of a moral status that no one else has to abide by. But that's power. That's not love.
and it's not morality.
No.
Actually part of what flummoxes me right now is the moral injury being done, not just to people, but to institutions
Hmm.
and to places where people did, even though they weren't constructed in the best way, there was some dignity and some respect in terms of how persons could move ahead. That's going to be taken away from many people, I'm afraid.
Hmm. And Phil, I'm not afraid about that so much as I'm afraid that the trick has been pulled is people feel like they have no other option. You know, there are other ways to maneuver, but we are so hurt by what has been done that we can't see our way to that. That's where the power is. Uh, Um, and that's what's most worrisome. It's like when we lose our imagination, we can't imagine a different way, a a different way. It may or may not be a better way, but there are different ways. But we can't imagine it because we're so hurt by the injustice of the injury.
Wow. You've turned philosopher on me. That's potent stuff. That's powerful stuff. And
I
it
believe
causes
it.
me, are you hopeful or not hopeful? Do you
I'm ver
think imagination can be rekindled?
I do. I'm hopeful that imagination can be rekindled. Um, I have a degree of trepidation that in the imagining, we just imagine a morphed version of what existed before,
Mm.
as opposed to, just letting the imagination go wild and living into it. I mean, what I say to people who are worried about failure, I'm like, listen, what we are witnessing right now is a colossal failure. So what if we try something and it doesn't work? That's not my fear. My fear is that we try to replicate what wasn't working and call it
And
something different.
yeah, well, yes, yeah. I mean, one of the ways I talk about the challenges I've faced in, I guess it's everywhere in our society, but I feel it especially in Indiana, is that we are a place that is long on charity and short on justice.
Mhm.
That we're quick to say we're going to fix this by helping these poor people, but we lie even about that. I mean, the lie right now that's being perpetrated around Medicaid is that able-bodied people will
Mhm.
be able to get that help, but the money, well, first of all, how what percentage? 90% of the people getting it are already working.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a ruse. So what I want to ask you is, how will imagination emerge when such cruelty is taking place?
That's the irrational, hopeful part of me. Um, and I think about what happened post-apartheid South Africa. That was an imaginative way of trying to redevelop a country that was just ravaged by violence and hateful behaviors that are cloaked here, but are playing out in similar ways. So that's where I get the hope from. How it will happen, though, I really am leaning more and more toward the younger people who are just like, F all this anyway. What if we do it this way? And I feel like my responsibility and the responsibility of the elders is to say yes, not what if.
I like that. I think you're right. Um, and the other piece that I'm aware of is a lot of what we're experiencing has just been hidden just below the surface all along anyway.
Hmm.
And it's being exposed, and maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I mean, only in the sense that it's now clear. And those of us who've had difficulty seeing some things, now it's straight in your face.
yeah. Yeah, and you can make the choice to turn a blind eye to it, but the difference is that there's enough people around who are seeing it. I was thinking about the impact on those who did not think it could happen to them, and it makes me think about the story of Moses and Pharaoh.
Mhm.
Moses kept telling him, "Look, man, this is gonna happen," and he was like, "No, But when his own son was at risk, and it's an unfortunate thing that we're witnessing now. It's like, oh, you mean to tell me this can happen to me? I don't operate in that way, but a lot of people do. And now everyone's like, there's an urgency to put a stop to some of this foolishness. But it's not like the bell hadn't been rung. There was a choice to not hear it. And now the ringing is exponentially louder for some. Whereas some of us are like, yeah, we've been here ringing the bell, we've been hearing the bell. I mean,
Yeah, hoping the bell would ring so we could get up off the mat.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
so I take your words with, as signs of hope, and I'm going to need to think about how to better support and strengthen the young among us,
Hmm.
who will be the, I think those will be the places where imagination will bubble up, uh, especially, as we've said, if we can find, if they can find, not for me to find for them, if they can find places to do it together and not
Hmm.
be isolated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that they're, and I mean, very limited view, just like with Diamon's daughter, Dejanay, my son, his best friend Todd. I mean, young people are talking about what is happening, but they're also talking about what they would love to see. And I think, and I went hard on the Democratic Party here on Saturday because our role as their elders is to say yes and
Yeah,
to make sure that the structures that have worked for us just don't work for them and say
that's right.
okay. Because the fact is they've got a lot longer time on this planet than we do. So it goes back to what are you willing to let go?
Well, we don't have time for it, but I'm wondering, we could talk about where the church plays a role in this,
Yeah.
and if the church is even prepared. Uh, so I won't go there right now.
You telling jokes, Phil.
Yeah,
You
you didn't know
practicing
I
your
was a
stand up.
comedian, did you?
Didn't.
There are some places. There are a few, um, but I I think the young people will have to sort that one out for themselves, and what we've meant by church for centuries just isn't going to work.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, just institutionally, after the election, I attended a church service, and the pastor stood up and read the tenets of the United Methodist Church, which I hadn't really paid attention to. But when it got to the anti abortion thing and got to we're anti this, we're pro, I'm like, yeah, yeah. And we won't even talk about my cousins. We want, like you said, we don't have time for that.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you, my friend. It's been good to talk. And I'm going to need to figure out how to have some of these younger folks on this podcast because they probably have some teaching to do.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
Thank you, Shauna Murphy, for who you are, for your wisdom, and for your friendship. And this has all been a part of the Belonging Exchange podcast, visiting with Shauna Murphy. And I'm hoping that you'll listen in as we share with others in the future. But you can find out more by going to the Belonging Exchange website. And thank you for joining us today. Remember, relationship is more important than what we think we know about controlling others.
Amen.